This is a video for 6.4 social change. There's 12 types of different social movements. We're only going to focus on 4 of those today that I think are the most common, that you tend to see the most. The first is going to be a reform movement, and this is where individuals are trying to seek significant political, social, or economic change. So there's an issue, they address that issue and want to see change for that issue, and are fighting for that specific change or reform. The second type of movement is a revolutionary movement, and this is where you see an overthrowing of an existing government or system. So in social studies, a lot of times you hear it called a coup. We hear this, or we've seen this happen whenever there's a government that has been overthrown. The French Revolution, for example, would be an example of a revolutionary movement. The third is a peaceful movement, and this is where we see nonviolent methods and campaigns of civil resistance. So the focus is, again, for change, but the idea being a very peaceful type of change. And the fourth and last movement that we're going to focus on is a global movement, and this is where we want to see social change that happens at a global or transnational level. So maybe not every single country, but where you see a number of countries trying to address the same issue. The environment would be an example of a global movement, protecting the environment. I'm going to show you now 4 examples of those 4 types of movements. So the first movement that we see here is the Never Again movement. This is from the march that we had in Washington a couple months ago. And this movement would be an example of a reform movement. They're asking for significant political change or social change in their gun laws and gun legislation, making it harder to get access to guns. The second is when we saw the overthrowing of the Iraqi government after the U.S. invaded. This would be them tearing down the statue of Saddam Hussein. And again, this would be an example of your revolutionary movement where you're overthrowing an existing system. The third example is a civil rights movement. We have individuals sitting at the lunch counter as food is being poured on them and they're being taunted in the background. You can see there's nonviolence. There is no sorts of aggression. These individuals that are participating in the movement are sitting there quietly and peacefully. And in fact, not only were they able to do that, but they also trained for that. So they had to go through trainings where people were harassing them, but they had to use nonviolent tactics in order to respond. So again, that's an example of a peaceful movement where they're using nonviolent methods. And the final would be a global movement, and this is where we see child labor. These are actually children who are mining cobalt, which is what you use for your battery on your phone. So these children are cobalt mining. They have been essentially sold into mining at a very young age. We're seeing this as a worldwide issue in cobalt farms, but also we see it in cocoa farms, and then in other industries throughout the world. So this would be a global movement where we want to see change at the global or transnational level. So again, not every country has a problem with child labor, but there's enough that do have a problem with child labor where we would like to see a change happen. For each one of those 4 social movements, they go through 4 stages. So the first stage is going to be emergence, and this is where we see some sort of social, political, or economic problem is identified by individuals who are unhappy with the current situation. So this is, for example, if we use the Never Again movement, we saw that young people were outraged after the shooting at Sandy Hook, and again after the shooting in Parkland, where we saw people come together to want to address the ability for individuals to access guns. After the emergence of the movement, then you see coalescence, and that's where we see goals, objectives, and strategies are outlined and the message is spread. So again, if we use the Never Again message, you would watch some of the speeches from the Never Again students, and they were asking for very specific movement by Congress. So they had very specific goals on what they want Congress to do and how they want Congress to act. One way is to raise the age of accessing a weapon to 21. So that would be one way that they would, or one goal that they have. This is some examples of the different levels of the Parkland or the Never Again movement. So we see the first step here, the first stage here, emergence, where we're identifying the problem. Barack Obama tweeted out, "We are grieving with Parkland, but we are not powerless. Caring for our kids is our first job, and until we can honestly say that we're doing enough to keep them safe from harm, including long overdue common sense gun safety laws that most Americans want, then we have to change." So again, identifying the problem there. This is a link if you want to type it in. You are more than welcome to do so. It's a CNN video on, the Parkland students asking for specific steps for Congress to make in the gun legislation. So again, that would be the second phase where they're identifying their goals and their objectives. The third stage is institutionalization, and this is where we see leadership developing, funding is sought, strategies shift towards the more conventional and less radical. So they may try to find money to implement certain programs, or they are going to focus on being a little more organized and less just random protests. The fourth is going to be decline. This is where you meet all of your objectives, conditions shift, and funding disappears. Dissent is squashed, and there is infighting. I have a slight problem with this number 4 because I think we see a lot of decline without them meeting their objectives. So I would say that part is not always part of number 4. A lot of times we start to see conditions shift and funding disappear without objectives being met. So the obviously positive part would be if they meet all their objectives, but we do see that happen without objectives being met. So these are the Parkland students. This would be an example of the leadership that's developed out of that Parkland student movement. These are the individuals that we typically see speaking on most news programs, as well as asking for very specific movements from Congress. What you are going to end up doing with 6.4 is you're going to end up picking a movement and doing some research on it. So nothing specific or nothing too in-depth, just an overall general movement, explaining it, the objectives of it. So in other words, what were they trying to do? That's the objectives. What did they want to do, or what were they trying to accomplish? The movement stage, so what one of those 4 stages are they in? So 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then finally, what was their outcome? And if they're still if they haven't hit an outcome yet, that's fine. You don't have to say that they have. You can just say no outcome has been achieved at this moment. Or even if it's a small outcome, maybe they didn't get a lot done, but maybe they're able to do something. And today you're going to focus on how do social movements show social change. That's it.